Okay, 7 maidens, 3 gentlemen go to the mountains outside Florence to wait out the bubonic plague. And like anybody who's doing social distancing, they have to entertain themselves. So they're going to tell stories. This is the first story on the first day told by Panfilo. We'll just kind of skip the introduction because one thing about Boccaccio is anybody who writes a book this long probably doesn't do a very good job of getting to the point. So we'll just kind of skip to the story itself. It was said then that Musciata Francese, having become a fine gentleman after acquiring enormous wealth and fame as a merchant in France, was obliged to come to Tuscany with the brother of the French king, Lord Charles Lackland, who had been urged and encouraged to come by Pope Boniface. But finding that his affairs, as is usually the case with merchants, were entangled here, there, and everywhere, and being unable quickly or easily to unravel them, he decided to place them in the hands of a number of different people. All this he succeeded in arranging, except that he was left with the problem of finding someone capable of recovering certain loans which he had made to various people in Burgundy. Burgundy is in France. He's gone to Tuscany, which is in Italy, which is where the story takes place. Okay. The reason for his dilemma was that he had been told the Burgundians were a quarrelsome, thoroughly bad and unprincipled set of people, and he was quite unable to think of anyone he could trust who was at the same time sufficiently villainous to match the villainy of the Burgundians. After devoting much thought to this problem, he suddenly recalled a man known as Ser Cepperello of Prato, who had been a frequent visitor to his house in Paris. This man was short in stature and used to dress very neatly, and the French, who did not know the meaning of the word Cepperello, thinking that it signified chapel, which in their language means garland, and because, as we have said, he was a little man, used to call him not Ciappello, but Ciappelletto, and everywhere in that part of the world, where very few people knew him as Ser Cepperello, he was known as Ciappelletto. This Ciappelletto was a man of the following sort. A notary by profession, he would have taken it as a slight on his honor if one of his legal deeds, and he drew up very few of them, were discovered to be other than false. In fact, he would have drawn up free of charge as many false documents as required of him, and done it more willingly than one who was highly paid for his services. He would take great delight in giving false testimony, whether asked for it or not. In those days, great reliance was placed in France upon sworn declarations, and since he had no scruples about swearing falsely, he used to win, by these nefarious means, every case in which he was required to swear upon his faith to tell the truth. He would take particular pleasure and a great amount of trouble in stirring up enmity, discord, and bad blood between friends, relatives, and anybody else, and more calamities that ensued, the greater would be his rapture. If he were invited to witness a murder or any other criminal act, he would never refuse but willingly go along, and he often found himself cheerfully assaulting or killing people with his own hands. He was a mighty blasphemer of God and his saints, losing his temper on the tiniest pretext, as if he were the most hot-blooded man alive. He never went to church, and he would use foul language to pour scorn on all her sacraments, declaring them repugnant. On the other hand, he would make a point of visiting taverns and other places of ill repute and supplying them with his custom. Of women, he was as fond as dogs are fond of a good stout stick. In their opposite, he took greater pleasure than the most depraved man on earth. He would rob and pilfer as conscientiously as if he were a saintly man making an offering. He was such a prize glutton and heavy drinker that he would occasionally suffer for his overindulgence in a manner that was most unseemly. He was a gambler and a card sharper of the first order. But why do I lavish so many words upon him? He was perhaps the worst man ever born, yet for all his villainy, he had long been protected by the power and influence of Messer Musciato, on whose account he was many a time treated with respect, both by private individuals, whom he frequently abused, and by the courts of law, which he was forever abusing. So that when Musciato, who was well acquainted with his way of living, called on Saint Ciappelletto to mind, he judged him to be the very man that the perverseness of the Burgundians required. He therefore sent for him at once and addressed him as follows. Saint Ciappelletto, as you know, I'm about to go away from here altogether, but I have some business to settle amongst others with the Burgundians. These people are full of tricks, and I know of no one better fitted than yourself to recover what they owe me. And so, since you are not otherwise engaged at present, if you will attend to this matter, I propose to obtain favors for you at court, and allow you a reasonable portion of the money you recover. Saint Ciappelletto, who was out of a job at the time and ill-supplied with worldly goods, seeing that the man who had long been his prop and stay was about to depart, made up his mind without delay and said, for he really had no alternative, that he would do it willingly. So that when they had agreed on terms, Saint Ciappelletto received powers of attorney from Musciato and letters of introduction from the king, and after Musciato's departure, he went to Burgundy, where scarcely anybody knew him, and there, in a gentle and amiable fashion that ran contrary to his nature, as though he were holding his anger in reserve as a last resort, he issued his first demands, and began to do what he had gone there to do. Before long, however, while lodging in the house of two Florentine brothers who ran a money-lending business there and did him great honor out of their respect for Musciato, he happened to fall ill, whereupon the two brothers promptly summoned doctors and servants to attend him, and provided him with everything he needed to recover his health. But all their assistance was unavailing, because the good man, who was already advanced in years, had lived a disordered existence, was reported by his doctors to be going each day from bad to worse, like one who was suffering from a fatal illness. The two brothers were filled with alarm, and one day alongside the room in which Saint Ciappelletto was lying, they began talking together. "What are we to do about the fellow?" said one to the other. "We've landed ourselves in a fine mess on his account, because to turn him away from our house in his present condition would arouse a lot of adverse comment and show us to be seriously lacking in common sense. What would people say if they suddenly saw us evicting a dying man after giving him hospitality in the first place, and taking so much trouble to have him nursed and waited upon, when he couldn't possibly have done anything to offend us? On the other hand, he has led such a wicked life that he will never be willing to make his confession or receive the sacraments of the church, and if he dies unconfessed, no church will want to accept his body, and he'll be flung into the moat like a dog." So, sacred burial in a churchyard, you had to be inside the church. So let's just say some people, you couldn't put them in sacred ground, and you chucked them in the river. Let the water take them away. Anyway, let's go on. But even if he makes his confession, his sins are so many and so appalling that the same thing will happen, because there will be neither friar nor priest who is either willing or able to give him absolution, in which case, since he will not have been absolved, he will be flung into the moat just the same. And when the townspeople see what has happened, they'll create a commotion, not only because of our profession, which they considered iniquitous and never cease to condemn, but also because they long to get their hands on our money. And they will go about shouting, "Away with those Lombard dogs," that the church refuses to accept. And they'll come running to our lodgings, perhaps, not content with stealing our goods, they'll take away our lives into the bargain. So we shall be in a pretty fix either way if this fellow dies. Saint Ciappelletto, who, as we have said, was lying near the place where they were talking, heard everything they were saying about him, for he was sharp of hearing, as invalids invariably are. So he called them to him and said, "I don't want to worry you in the slightest on my account, nor to fear that I will cause you to suffer in any harm. I heard what you were saying about me, and I agree entirely that what you predict will actually come to pass if matters take the course you anticipate, but they will do nothing of the kind. I have done our good Lord, so many injuries while still I lived, that to do him another now I am dying will be neither here nor there. So go and bring me the holiest and ablest friar you can find, if there is such a one, and leave everything to me. For I shall set your affairs and my own neatly in order, so that all will be well, and you'll have nothing to complain of. Whilst deriving little comfort from all this, the two brothers nevertheless went out to the friary and asked for a wise and holy man to come and hear the confession of a Lombard who was lying ill in their house. They were given an ancient friar of good and holy ways, who was an expert in the scriptures and a most venerable man, towards whom all the townspeople were greatly and specially devoted, and they conducted him to their home. On reaching the room where Saint Ciappelletto was lying, he sat down at his bedside and first began to comfort him with kindly words. Then he asked him how long it was since he had last been to confession, whereupon Saint Ciappelletto, who had never been to confession in his life, replied, "Father, it has always been my custom to go to confession at least once every week, except that there were many weeks in which I go more often. But to tell the truth, since I fell ill nearly a week ago, my illness has caused me so much discomfort that I haven't been to confession at all." "My son," said the friar, "you have done well, and you should persevere in this habit of yours. Since you go so often to confession, I can see that there will be little for me to hear or to ask." "Master friar," said Saint Ciappelletto, "do not speak thus, for however frequently or regularly I confess, it is always my wish that I should make a general confession of all the sins I can remember committing from the day I was born till the day of my confession. I therefore beg you, good father, to question me about everything just as closely as if I had never been confessed. Do not spare me because I happen to be ill, for I would much rather mortify this flesh of mine than that, by treating it with lenience, I should do anything that could lead to the perdition of my soul, which my Savior redeemed with his precious blood." These words were greatly pleasing to the holy friar, and it seemed to him proof of a well-disposed mind, having warmly commended Sir Ciappelletto for his practice of his. He began by asking him whether he had ever committed the sin of lust with any woman, to which, heaving a sigh, Sir Ciappelletto replied, "Father, I am loath to tell you the truth of this matter, in case I should sin by way of vainglory." To which the Holy Father replied, "Speak out freely, for no man ever sinned by telling the truth, either in confession or otherwise." "Since you assure me that this is so," said Ciappelletto, "I will tell you I am a virgin as pure as on the day I came forth from my mother's womb." "Oh, may God give you his blessing," said the friar. "How nobly you have lived, and your restraint is all the more deserving of praise in that, had you wished, you would have had a greater liberty to do the opposite than those who, like ourselves, are expressly forbidden by rule." Next he asked him whether he had displeased God by committing the sin of gluttony, to which, fetching a deep sigh, Sir Ciappelletto replied that he had, on many occasions. For although, apart from the periods of fasting normally observed in the course of the year by the devout, he was accustomed to fasting on bread and water for at least 3 days every week, he had drunk the water as pleasurably and avidly, especially when he'd been fatigued from praying and going on a pilgrimage, as any great bibber of wine. He had often experienced a craving for those dainty little wild herb salads that women eat when they go away to the country, and sometimes the thought of food had been more attractive to him than he considered proper in one who, like himself, was fasting out of piety. Whereupon the friar said, "My son, these sins are natural, and they are very trivial, and therefore I would not have you burden your conscience with them more than necessary. No matter how holy a man may be, he will be attracted by the thought of food after a long spell of fasting, and by the thought of drink when he is fatigued." "Oh," said Sir Ciappelletto, Do not tell me this to console me, Father. As you are aware, I know that things done in the service of God must all be done honestly and without any grudge, and if anyone should do otherwise, he is committing a sin." The friar, delighted, said to him, "I am contented to see you taking such a view, and it pleases me greatly that you should have such a good and pure conscience in this matter. But tell me, have you ever been guilty of avarice, by desiring to have more than was proper, or keeping what you should not have kept?" To which Sieur Ciappelletto replied, "Father, I would not wish to judge me ill, because I am in the house of these moneylenders. I have nothing to do with their business. Indeed, I have come here with the express intention of warning and reproaching them, and dissuading them from this abominable form of money-making, and I think I would have succeeded if God had not stricken me in this manner. However, I would have you know that my father left me a wealthy man, and when he was dead, I gave the greater part of his fortune to charity. Since then, in order to support myself and enable me to assist the Christian poor, I have done a small amount of trading, in the course of which I have desired to gain, and I have always shared what I have gained with the poor, allocating one half of my own needs and giving the other half to them. And in this I have had so much help from my Creator that I have continually gone from strength to strength in the management of my affairs." "Oh, you have done well," said the friar. "But tell me, how often have you lost your temper?" "Oh," said Sir Ciappelletto, "I can assure you I have done that very often. But who is there who could restrain himself when the whole day long he sees men doing disgusting things and failing to observe God's commandments or to fear his terrible wrath? There have been many times in the space of a single day when I would rather have been dead than alive, looking about me and seeing young people fritter away their time, telling lies, going drinking in taverns, failing to go to church, and following the ways of the world rather than those of God." "My son," said the friar, this kind of anger is justified, and for my part, I would not require you to do penance for it. But has it ever happened that your anger has led you to commit murder, or to pour abuse on anyone, or do them any other form of injury?" To which Sir Ciappelletto replied, "Oh, sir, however could you, that appear to be a man of God, say such a thing? If I had thought for a single moment of doing any of the things you mentioned, do you suppose I imagined that God would have treated me so generously? Those things are the business of cutthroats and evildoers, and whenever I have chanced upon one of their number, I have always sent him packing and offering up a prayer for his conversion." "May God give you his blessing," said the friar. "But now, tell me, my son, have you ever borne false witness against any man, or spoken ill of people, or taken what belonged to others without seeking their permission?" "Never, sir, except on one occasion," replied Sir Ciappelletto, "when I spoke ill of someone, for I once had a neighbor who, without the slightest cause, was forever beating his wife, so that on this one occasion I spoke ill of him to his wife's kinfolk, for I felt extremely sorry for that unfortunate woman. Whenever the fellow had had too much to drink, God alone could tell you how he battered her." Then the friar said, "Let me see now. You tell me you were a merchant. Did you ever deceive anyone, as merchants do?" "Faith, sir, I did," said Sir Ciappelletto. "But all I know about him is that he was a man who brought me some money that he owed me for a length of cloth I had sold him. I put the money away in a box without counting it, and a whole month passed before I discovered there were 4 pennies more than should have been. I kept them for a year with the intention of giving them back, but I never saw them again. So I gave them away to a beggar." "That was a trivial matter," said the friar, "and you did well to dispose of the money as you did. The holy friar questioned him on many other matters, but always he answered in similar vein, and hence the friar was ready to proceed without further ado to give him absolution. But Saint Ciappelletto said, "Sir, I still have 1 or 2 sins I have not told you about." The friar asked him what they were, and he said, "I recall that I once failed to show a proper respect for a holy Sabbath by making one of my servants sweep the house after nuns on a Saturday." "Oh," said the friar, "this, my son, is a trifling matter." "No, father," said Ciappelletto, "you must not call it trifling, for the Sabbath has to be greatly honored, seeing that this was the day on which the Lord rose from the dead." Then the friar said, Have you done anything else?" "Yes, sir," said Saint Ciappelletto, "for I once, without thinking what I was doing, spat in the house of God." The friar began to smile and said, "My son, this is not a thing to worry about. We members of the religious orders spit there continually." "That is very wicked of you," said Saint Ciappelletto, "for nothing should be kept more clean than the holy temple in which sacrifice is offered up to God." In brief, he told the friar many things of this sort, and finally he began to sigh, and then to wail loudly, as he was well able to do whenever he pleased. "My son," said the holy friar, "what is the matter?" "Oh, alas, sir," replied Saint Ciappelletto, "I have one sin left to which I have never confessed. So great is my shame in having to reveal it, and whenever I remember it, I cry as you see me doing now, and feel quite certain that God will never have mercy on me for this terrible sin." "Come now, my son," said the holy friar, "what are you saying? If all the sins that were ever committed by the whole of mankind, together with those that men will yet commit till the end of the world, were concentrated in one single man, and he was as truly repentant and contrite as I see you to be, God is so benign and merciful that he would freely remit them on their being confessed to him, and therefore you may safely reveal it." Then Saint Ciappelletto said, still weeping loudly, "Alas, father, my sin is too great, and I can scarcely believe that God will ever forgive me for it unless you intercede with your prayers." To which the friar replied, You may safely reveal it, for I promise that I will pray to God on your behalf." Saint Ciappelletto went on weeping without saying anything, and the friar kept encouraging him to speak. But after Saint Ciappelletto, by weeping in this manner, had kept the friar for a very long time on tenterhooks, he heaved a great sigh and said, "Father, since you promise that you will pray to God for me, I will tell you. You are to know, then, that once, when I was a little boy, I cursed my mother." And having said this, he began to weep loudly all over again. "There now, my son," said the friar, "does this seem so great a sin? Does this seem so great a sin to you? Why, people curse God the whole day long, and yet he willingly forgives those who repent for having cursed him. Why then should you suppose he will not forgive you for this? Take heart and do not weep, for even if you had one of those who set him on the cross, I can see that you have so much contrition that he would certainly forgive you." "Oh, alas, father," said Saint Ciappelletto, "what are you saying? My dear sweet mother, who carried me day and night for 9 months in her body, and held me more than 100 times in her arms. It was too wicked of me to curse her, and to sin is too great, and if you do not pray to God for me, it will never be forgiven me." Perceiving that Saint Ciappelletto had nothing more to say, the friar absolved him and gave him his blessing. He took him for a very saintly man indeed, being fully convinced that what Saint Ciappelletto had said was true. But then, who is there who would not have been convinced on hearing a dying man talk in this fashion? Finally, when all was done, he said to him, "Saint Ciappelletto, with God's help, you will soon be well again. But in case it were to happen that God should summon your blessed and well-disposed soul to his presence, are you willing for your body to be buried in our convent?" To which Saint Ciappelletto replied, Yes, Father. In fact, I would not wish it to be elsewhere, since you have promised that you will pray to God for me. Besides, I have always been especially devoted to your order. So when you return to your convent, I beg you to see that I am sent that true body of Christ, which you consecrate every morning on the altar. For although I am unworthy of it, I intend, with your permission, to take it, and afterward to receive the holy extreme unction, so that having lived as a sinner, I shall at least die as a Christian. The holy man said he was greatly pleased, that the words were well spoken, and that he would see it was brought to him at once, and so it was. The two brothers, who strongly suspected that Saint Ciappelletto was going to deceive them, had posted themselves behind the wooden partition which separated the room where Saint Ciappelletto was lying from another. And as they stood there listening, they could easily follow what Saint Ciappelletto was saying to the friar. When they heard the things he confessed to having done, they were so amused that every so often nearly exploded with mirth. And they said to each other, What manner of man is this, who neither old age nor illness nor fear of death, which he sees so close at hand, nor even the fear of God, before whose judgment he knows he must shortly appear, have managed to turn from his evil ways, or persuade to die any differently from the way he has lived. Seeing, however, that he had said all the right things to be received for burial in the church, they cared nothing for the rest. Shortly thereafter, Saint Ciappelletto made his communion, and failing rapidly, he received extreme unction. Soon after Vespers, on that very day that he had made his fine confession, he died, whereupon the two brothers made all necessary arrangements, using his money to see that he had an honorable funeral, and sending news of his death to the friars, and asking them to come that evening to observe the customary vigil, and the following morning to take away the body. On hearing that he had passed away, the holy friar who had received his confession arranged with the prior of the chapter house bell for the chapter house bell to be rung, and to the assembled friars he showed that Saint Ciappelletto had been a saintly man, as his confession had amply proved. He expressed the hope that through him the Lord God would work many miracles, and persuaded him that his body should be received with the utmost reverence and loving care. Credulous to a man, the prior and the other friars agreed to do so, and that evening they went to the place where Saint Ciappelletto's body lay, and celebrating a great and solemn vigil over it. And in the morning they dressed in albs and copses, carrying books in their hands and bearing crosses before them, singing as they went. They all came for the body, which they then carried back to their church with tremendous pomp and ceremony, followed by nearly all the people of the town, men and women alike. And when it had been set down in the church, the holy friar who had confessed him climbed into the pulpit and began to preach marvelous things about Saint Ciappelletto's life, his fasts, his virginity, his simplicity and innocence and saintliness, relating, among other things, what he had tearfully confessed to him as his greatest sin, and describing how he had barely been able to convince him that God would forgive him, at which point he turned to reprimand his audience, saying, "And yet, you miserable sinners, have only to catch your feet in a wisp of straw for you to curse God and the Virgin and all the saints in heaven." Apart from this, he said much else about his loyalty and his purity of heart, and in brief, with a torrent of words that the people of the town believed implicitly, he fixed Saint Ciappelletto so firmly in the minds and affections of all those present, that when the service was over, everyone thronged around the body to kiss his feet and his hands. All the clothes were torn from his back, and those who succeeded in grabbing so much as a tiny fragment felt that they were in paradise itself. He had to be kept lying there all day so that everyone could come and gaze upon him. And on that same night he was buried with honor in a marble tomb in one of the chapels. From the next day forth, people began to go there to light candles and pray to him. And later, they began to make votive offerings and to decorate the chapel with figures made of wax in fulfillment of promises they had given. The fame of his saintliness and of the veneration in which he was held grew so to such proportions that there was hardly anyone who did not pray for his assistance in time of trouble, and they called him, and call him still, Saint Ciappelletto. Moreover, it is claimed that through him God has wrought many miracles, and that he continues to work them on behalf of whoever commands himself devoutly to this particular saint. It was thus then that Ser Cepperello of Prato lived and died, becoming a saint in the way you have heard. Nor would I wish to deny that perhaps God has blessed and admitted him to his presence, for albeit he led a wicked, sinful life, it is possible that at the 11th hour he was so sincerely repentant that God had mercy upon him and received him into his kingdom. But since this is hidden from us, I speak only with regard to the outward appearance, and I say that the fellow would rather be in hell, in the hands of the devil, than in paradise. And if this is the case, we may recognize how very great is God's loving kindness towards us, and it takes into account not of our error, but of the purity of our faith, and grants our prayers even when we appoint as our emissary one who is his enemy, thinking him to be his friend, as though he were appealing to one who was truly holy as our intercessor for his favor. And therefore, so that we, the members of this joyful company, may be guided safely and securely by his grace through these present adversities, let us praise the name of him with whom we began our storytelling. Let us hold him in reverence, and let us commend ourselves to him in the hour of our need, in the certain knowledge that we shall be heard. And there the narrator fell silent. For the Renaissance, this is pretty potent stuff. Back then, the holiness of the church and the saints was, well, beyond dispute. But here Boccaccio is certainly calling it into question, basically saying, well, how do we know these saints are so holy? This story, 100 years earlier, would have gotten him into a lot of trouble. But, well, certainly when a plague comes to town, certain social mores change. But anyway, I hope you've enjoyed the reading. And as soon as I figure out how to do it, I'm going to turn off this camera. Bye-bye.